At 7:15 a.m. on Thursday, August 3rd, 1944, Father James Murphy stood in Sacred Heart Church, Bastrop, Texas, staring at a crack in the north wall. The church was built in 1894. Limestone blocks hauled 60 miles by German and Czech immigrants who believed walls should last forever. Father Murphy was 64 years old, 32 years at this church, and he'd never seen stone move like this. When he pressed his hand against the wall, it shifted. Just a quarter inch, but enough. The roof beam above was sagging. The wall wasn't holding weight anymore. Sunday was Assumption Day, 3 days away. 300 people would pack the pews, standing shoulder to shoulder, praying for sons fighting in Europe and the Pacific. Every contractor in Texas was building airstrips. There were no masons left, no engineers, no materials. If that wall gave way, it would take half the roof with it. Father Murphy called the only person he could think of, Captain Robert Harrison at Camp Swift, the prisoner of war facility 7 miles northeast of town. Captain Harrison was 32, from San Antonio, raised Catholic. His mother had made him promise to look after the church. "Bob, I need help. The north wall is coming apart. Sunday's in 3 days." There was a pause on the line. "I might have someone. Let me make a call." 1 hour later, a military truck pulled up to the church. 2 guards stepped out first, rifles ready. Then came a thin man in a faded uniform with 2 letters stenciled on the back. PW, Giuseppe Luca Bennetti, 43 years old. Prisoner IT 4728. Before the war, he'd run a small masonry company in Tivoli, 20 miles east of Rome. His family had built walls for 4 generations. He'd restored the courtyard at Villa d'Esti in 1938. Then Mussolini drafted him. He fought in Libya, got captured near Tobruk, ended up in Texas picking cotton and hauling railroad ties. He hadn't touched stone in 2 years. Giuseppe walked the length of the north wall slowly, running his hand along the crack. He pressed against different sections, listening to the sound the stone made. He looked up at the beam, then back at the foundation. Father Murphy and Captain Harrison watched in silence. Finally, Giuseppe spoke. His English was broken, but clear. "Father, this is no good. Old mortar is dead. Wall is separating. Beam will fall. Can you fix it?" Giuseppe was quiet for a moment. "Yes, but you don't have what I need." Captain Harrison stepped forward. "What do you need? Concrete? Steel? No? Then what? Clay, lime, ash, horsehair." Captain Harrison blinked. "Horsehair? Roman mortar, 2,000 years old. Pantheon still stands. Colosseum still stands. We make same thing here." Father Murphy looked at the crack, then at Giuseppe. "How long?" 3 days. Maybe it works, maybe no. I don't know." The priest made his decision. "Do it." By 9 a.m., Giuseppe was walking the fields near Bastrop with 2 other Italian POWs, Antonio Moretti, 29, and Marco Santini, 34. An armed guard followed. They found red clay deposits near the Colorado River, dense, iron-rich, exactly what Giuseppe needed. They filled 2 buckets. At Muller's Feed and Grain on Main Street, the owner, Hermann Muller, a German immigrant, handed over a 50-pound bag of lime when he heard it was for the church. No charge. At the stable behind Schumann's livery, the stable hand gave them a burlap sack full of horsetail clippings. He thought they were crazy. Back at Camp Swift, Giuseppe built a fire pit and burned mesquite logs down to fine white ash. His fellow prisoners gathered to watch. "Giuseppe, what are you making?" "Something old." The mixing took 3 hours. Giuseppe worked in a wooden trough, folding clay, lime, ash, and horsehair like dough. The proportions had to be exact. Too much lime and it would crack. Too much clay and it wouldn't harden. Antonio added water in small amounts. Marco tested the texture. When Giuseppe finally nodded, it was past noon. They returned to Sacred Heart Church at 3 p.m. The first step was the worst part, digging out all the old mortar. Giuseppe and Antonio chiseled into the crack, pulling out decades of crumbling powder. The deeper they dug, the wider the gap became. By 5 p.m., the crack was 4 inches wide in places. Father Murphy stood watching, his face pale. "It looks worse." Giuseppe didn't look up. "Always worse before better, Father." By 7 p.m., they began filling the crack. Giuseppe packed the Roman mortar deep into the gap, layer by layer, tamping it down with a wooden block. Antonio kept mixing fresh batches. Marco smoothed the surface. The guards stood outside, smoking, skeptical. One of them muttered, "Mud and hair. That's supposed to hold up a roof." By 9 p.m., the crack was filled, but the mortar was wet, soft to the touch. Father Murphy asked the question that everyone was thinking. "How long until it hardens?" Giuseppe wiped his hands on a rag. "In Italy, 1 week. Here, Texas is hot, dry, maybe 4 days." Captain Harrison checked his watch. "Sunday is in 3.5 days. Giuseppe looked at the wall. "Then we pray it dries fast." Friday morning, Giuseppe returned at sunrise. He pressed his thumb against the mortar. It left a deep print, still wet. Antonio frowned. "It should be firmer by now." Giuseppe said nothing. He sat in the front pew and stared at the wall. Friday afternoon, the mortar was slightly firmer but still damp. Captain Harrison was losing patience. "Giuseppe, we're running out of time." Giuseppe pressed the mortar again. "I know." Friday evening, Father Murphy sat beside Giuseppe in the empty church. "Tell me the truth. Will it hold?" Giuseppe was quiet for a long time. "My grandfather built a wall for a church in Tivoli. Same method. That wall stood 40 years. Maybe it's still standing. But every batch is different. Clay, lime, ash, temperature, humidity. I mix the same way, but I don't know if it will work here." Father Murphy's voice was barely above a whisper. "So we're gambling." "Yes, Father." Saturday morning, 5:30 a.m. Giuseppe arrived early. He walked straight to the wall and pressed his palm against the mortar. Still damp. He pressed harder. It gave slightly. Marco whispered in Italian, "This won't work." Giuseppe didn't answer. Saturday noon. The mortar was firmer, but not hard. Captain Harrison wanted to cancel Mass. Giuseppe asked for 1 more day. "If we stop now, you'll never fix this wall. No materials, no engineers. This is your only chance." Captain Harrison stared at him. "You're asking me to gamble 300 lives on mud." "Yes." Saturday evening, Father Murphy made the announcement at Vespers. "Tomorrow's Mass will proceed as scheduled. I ask you all to pray." He didn't mention the wall, but word had spread. Everyone knew. Sunday, August 6th, 1944, 5:47 a.m. Giuseppe walked into Sacred Heart Church alone. Captain Harrison had given him permission to come early. He went straight to the wall, pressed his hand against the mortar, hard. He pressed with both hands, solid. He took out a pocket knife and scraped the surface gently. The mortar didn't budge. He tapped it with his knuckles. The sound rang clear, like stone. Giuseppe closed his eyes and said one word in Italian. "Grazie." At 7:30 a.m., the church began to fill. Farmers in Sunday shirts, women in cotton dresses, children scrubbed clean. They packed the pews and stood along the walls, right beside the repaired section. Father Murphy watched from the altar. The crack was invisible now, smoothed over, blending with the old stone. At 8 a.m., Mass began. Hymns rose, voices echoed. The building held, the wall held, Giuseppe's mortar held. After Mass, Father Murphy found Giuseppe standing outside under the live oak tree. "It worked." Giuseppe smiled faintly. "Yes, Father." "How did you know?" "I didn't. My grandfather used to say, you do the work right, then you trust God with the rest." Father Murphy handed him an envelope. "There's money." Giuseppe shook his head. "No, Father. For 2 years I break things, destroy things. Today I build something. That is enough." 2 months later, in October 1944, the Army began shipping Italian POWs home. On Giuseppe's last day at Camp Swift, he asked to visit the church one final time. Father Murphy gave him a photograph of Sacred Heart Church and told him, "So you remember what you built." Giuseppe took it carefully. "I never forget." Giuseppe Luca Bennetti died on March 15, 1973, at age 72. His son found the photograph in the workshop. On the back, written in Italian, "Faith doesn't need steel. It only needs truth." If you visit Sacred Heart Church in Bastrop, Texas, you can still see it. The wall, the stones, the invisible repair. And if you press your hand against that limestone, cool, solid, unmoving, you're touching something built by an enemy's hands in 1944. Something that saved 300 lives. Something that's still holding 8 decades later, just like Giuseppe promised. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built from the simplest faith.